All right, I think I'm live. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. I couldn't get it to work a second ago, but we're good. Okay, so this should be live on the page, I assume. I think there's also an event that I created. Yeah, we're good. It's also an event that I created. So I feel like we're almost through the thick of this COVID thing. Maybe not. I don't know. But I want to talk about some of the common like behavioral side effects of COVID that I've been seeing, and probably a lot of other trainers as well. And just to clarify, behavioral side effects meaning COVID in general, not like if your dog has COVID. I know nothing about that. Um, but I do know that dogs are dealing with some different behavioral issues, and maybe some of y'all are seeing these things. Maybe it's way worse than it was. A couple of things I want to talk about today. One, some dogs are way too happy, or I maybe shouldn't say too happy, but super excited to greet people because they are just lacking the opportunities to. So they're just not getting the opportunities to see people, and they're just so darn excited. And basically, they've been deprived of the people, so that like increases their motivation to get to them, and so they're just beside themselves, jumping and all that. So I'd call that a good problem to have, but I know problems are still problems. You may want your dog to not jump on people, and now it seems like it's completely out of control, and you just can't get it to happen. I know everybody's been taking COVID. Everyone's been handling it differently in the sense that maybe some people have bubbles of people that they're seeing, the same 5 people. Maybe your dog is excited to see them, but since your dog is seeing them so often, he or she is not jumping for joy per se when they come over. Whereas if you do have one new person that they're meeting, maybe it's the plumber's coming over to fix the toilet or something. Maybe your dog is beside himself. So I'm going to talk about that. The other thing I've seen, and this is very common now, a lot of dogs that are, what's the math, 9 months, 8 months, a year, I don't know, somewhere around there, are struggling to be social with strangers, and that's because of lack of socialization. So that a lot of dogs have been sequestered in their homes, and maybe some of those dogs have been let out and they've seen people out and about, but a lot of dogs have not had anybody coming over their homes, and so they're nervous now when people are coming over. And the easiest explanation for that could be like lack of socialization, basically lack of exposure, lack of positive associations during that. And depending on the breed of your dog, if you have a guardian type breed, it might be worse for them. If you have a breed that's not considered a guardian, it might be easy for them. But nonetheless, I want to talk about that. And then a third thing that questions are coming up about, like, are dogs going to start getting anxious when you leave if you've been working from home? And some people have been working from home all along, and so if that's you, your life isn't that much different. Your dog's life is probably not that much different. But I can think of some of more of like the extreme sides of the spectrum where maybe your dog, you used to work 9 to 5, you'd get back, on the weekends you'd go to the grocery store, you'd go out to dinner on a Friday night or something, and so your dog was really used to all that stuff. But now, like, a more extreme side of things is maybe you are working from home, maybe you don't go out to eat anymore, maybe you order your groceries online and they're delivered to you. So really, I mean, you're not leaving the house ever. There's a chance that a dog could, potentially develop like some sort of an attachment to you, and then when you finally leave, that they could be anxious. There's no guarantee with that, but I'd say there's a chance. I am currently going through a separation anxiety program, which is going to help me be more helpful with that type of stuff. And because there's things that could be done with that, and I want to kind of talk about some common advice which could be helpful or which may not be helpful. So let's dive in. So the first thing is a dog that is too happy. Is that a problem? And so again, like, if we look at the grand scheme of things, if you have a dog that's nervous of people and it's fearful and running away, or fearful and aggressing to try to get the person to go away, you'd probably say, well, having a dog that's too excited is small potatoes. But small potatoes, I think that's the saying. But I mean, if you have a dog that, like, let's say a golden retriever that's 70 pounds, and when your mom comes over, your golden retriever is like, hey, and just runs into your mom and knocks her over, it does become a problem. So it's not the sense that I guess you could look at it as your dog might accidentally hurt somebody, not in an aggressive way, but in just an overjoyed kind of way. So it can be a problem. And I think the most important thing that we can do is manage to start. Management means doing what we can to prevent them from being able to do anything that involves their excitement. What I mean is, jumping is probably going to be the biggest problem with the dog that's too excited. My first line of defense at the very least would be a leash, so I can physically prevent my dog from making contact with my guest. So that would be one form of management. Another form of management would be, let's go ahead and stick them behind a gate, and once they're calm, they can come out and greet the guest. So that's management. Another form of management could be either of those two things, but also giving something that will help divert your dog's attention. So some sort of a special chew or stuffed Kong, basically just to say, I know you're excited, I know you want that thing. Why don't you focus on this for a little while? And then as your dog is focused on that, if it takes them like 5 or 10 minutes to get through it, they're still going to be excited to see the person. But at the very least, what we have is less excitement in the sense that we can probably get them to control themselves a little bit more. So we can manage, and I'd say that's really important. If the jumping bothers you, then you need to do one of those things, because if you're standing back a few feet and you're like, stop it, bad dog, get down, that stuff, it's going to do nothing. Unless you're like screaming at the top of your lungs, which I think we can all agree that nobody wants to stand there and scream at the top of their lungs at their dog. It's a good way to hurt your throat, and also it's probably not that effective. So we can do it in ways that are kind of easier to communicate. So step number one, manage, get them on leash, get them behind a gate. I think either of those two are helpful for managing door bolting as well. So if your dog isn't getting out that much now because you're not going out that much, they could see that door open and go, yeah, I'm out of here, and not, just go for a joy run. So anything like a gate, leash would be very helpful. You could use a crate as well. Give them something to do while they're in there. I think if you just put a dog behind in a crate when a guest arrives, that's going to lead to a ton of barking, and I don't think that's I don't think it would be fair to do that unless you're giving them something to work on. Otherwise, you're just going to get a lot of barking and such. Same thing with a gate. If you just put them behind a gate, if it's just for a moment to get the person in, and then you're going to, you've been working on your training and you're going to get your dog out and say, hey, Nancy, and you're going to say, okay, let's walk up and sit. I think that's fine. You don't necessarily need to give your dog something to do because you're just doing it quickly. But if you're going to put your dog behind the gate until he calms down, you got to give him something to do. Otherwise, that's going to be a long time. So there's some strategies. But then from a training standpoint, most people have, I guess maybe not most, I don't have any truth behind that, but a lot of people have a second person in their home. There's not nearly as much excitement with the regulars, but a lot of dogs still do get pretty excited when mom or dad gets home from work. So use that to your advantage as well. And what I would do is I'd use the management, I'd use leashes or gates or whatever. And I would say, okay, text me when you're coming in. So, my husband or wife steps in and I have my dog on leash. I say, all right, let's go say hi. We get the dog up to them, and we ask for a sit. If my dog sits, then they reach down and pet. Good dog. Hey, it's so good to see you. Yada, yada, yada. And if we got to jump, then boom, you're out of here. There is also the advice of just completely ignore your dog when you come in. I physically can't do that. I'm not going to ignore my dogs when I come in. I'm excited to see them. So I'm just going to ask them to do a behavior that I'd rather them do. And that's an effective way, which doesn't involve me having to just completely ignore them. So with that being said, it's like hey, let's do the sit. And it's a good way to teach an anti-jump. So let's sit instead. I also recommend to my clients, hey, why don't we practice this setup again with each other, or even if you don't have a person there, practice having your dog stay while you go and open the door and invite a fake person in, have them stay. Obviously it's not exactly the same, but if you at least keep that kind of warm, meaning if you get that sequence to the point where they're used to doing it and they're doing it often and they're getting rewarded for it, it's very, very helpful. Whereas if you go 6 months between seeing people and you expect your dog to hold a sit stay while a person walks in, it's a nightmare. So you got to practice this stuff. To the short of it too, I mean, we need to also work on, there's a difference between warm and cold. And what that really means is if you practice sit after sit after sit with person after person after person, your dog is going to warm up and get really good at those sits. But it doesn't necessarily just translate to a cold scenario, meaning when a person randomly shows up. So that's a little bit harder too. And I'm not going to get into that completely, but you have to add more time between reps for that to work. Hello, Patty. So the excitement part is definitely a problem. I would say it's a good problem to have, but it's still a problem nonetheless. If you do have trouble also holding on to your dog even on leash, I would use a front attaching harness. So that way I've got the leash attached to that, or a head halter if my dog's very, very strong. And I'd have some treats on me. I'd have my treat bag on me, especially in the early stages of all this. Now, one thing too, just as a side note, if you're stepping in and you're by yourself and your dog's so excited to see you, um, if they jump, you could say, "Oh, too bad," and step back out and shut the door. You step back in, you say, "Sit," they sit, and you say, "Oh, good doggy," and you give them the attention thereafter. That's an effective way to do it as well. But too excited is a problem that a lot of people are dealing with. But one that I'm seeing even more of is the whole upset. A young dog, generally they're young now because of COVID. It's been, we're like a year in. So a young dog, and or there's going to be some that were working through some of this prior to COVID, but now they've gone a whole year without getting any practice. And so now they're kind of backtracking too. But nonetheless, we've got dogs that are saying, "Oh, here's a person. I don't know who you are and what you're doing here." And they become nervous. Some will go into flight mode and they're going to, run the other way. Kind of pairing that with body language that kind of indicates that they're afraid. And while others go into the opposite where they kind of charge and bark and potentially bite and all that. I'm not going to go into complete training plans with that. I don't think that's not something we should touch on today because there's more to it than just kind of giving advice there. But nonetheless, that's very, very common. And I think, to say the least, I will give some advice. We should definitely manage. So you should not just kind of like let your dog run up to the person and see what happens, because that probably isn't going to help them with any sort of an association. They're probably going to get there and go, "Oh, I'm here and I'm still nervous, I'm still upset," or whatever. So I wouldn't just let them upstairs. I still would use a leash or a gate. I will say that, to have a lot of success helping a dog feel better about a stranger, even obviously maybe not a stranger to you, but a stranger to your dog, the best practice is to really try to start off with enough distance where your dog can see the person but isn't completely upset. I mean, ideally isn't upset at all. You kind of have more success that way when you're getting the person and the dog together more gradually than if it's like person's at the door and my dog's 5 feet away and we are 5 feet away and now my dog is very, very upset. So, there's that part as well. Have a little bit more distance. I mean, generally speaking, the overall goal is to change associations. And so we've all heard of like socialization. And kind of going back to it, to what I've stated a second ago, a lot of these dogs are dealing with a lack of socialization. So they're dealing with, they weren't socialized to people coming in their homes, so they never built these associations. And so what they're doing is going, "This is an unfamiliar person, I'm a little nervous." And so, again, like especially if you have breeds that were more or less bred to be weary of people, like if any sort of guardian breeds or whatever, they might be more susceptible to being weary of an unfamiliar person coming in. But we do focus on changing their association. And it's very, very successful. So, I mean, I'm going to kind of go through some of the common ones. I've heard people kind of give like a blanket advice of, "Oh, when a stranger comes in, have the stranger give the dog a treat." In general, that idea is technically correct. Like if the scary person is predicting something good, then we could change an association and then all of a sudden we have a dog that likes the person. But usually it's not as cut and dry as that. It's not usually as clean as that, because oftentimes what we end up having is a dog that's too upset. They might eat the food, but they're too darn upset. And so even if they eat it, it's still too intense for them. And maybe it's like a 1% change. I don't know. I don't even know if to put a number on it. So you end up having a dog that still pretty much feels the same way. And then worst case scenario with that is I've seen, or I've heard many times where a person, like a stranger, gives the dog the treat. So boom, here's your treat, doggy. And all of a sudden the dog comes over and takes it, but then the dog eats it and says, "Okay, well now I'm like 1 inch away from you and I'm very nervous." And what do? Well, they either run away because they're nervous, or they basically aggress and they say, "Get out of here, you're making me nervous." And that's where biting and stuff can happen. So I'm not a huge fan of having the strangers give the treats, because a lot could go wrong. And another thing that could go wrong is, let's say the stranger gives your dog a treat and then your dog takes it and your dog is still like very unsure. And then right after the treat is given, the person touches your dog's head. That is like whoa, don't do that. That's asking for a bite, because like, if your dog's weary of somebody and all of a sudden they're reaching out and trying to touch, that can go wrong as well. So I generally have the person only a part of the equation in the sense that I want to help my dog build an association with the person, but I don't have the person do anything actively to do it. So if y'all are dealing with dogs that are upset with people coming in, it does take some careful planning, and that's something that we can help with. There's lots of trainers that can help. I'm helping with that remotely, but ultimately it's a side effect that we're seeing kind of across the board. So if you have a dog that's too upset when seeing people, not even too upset, I would say upset. I don't know why I said too there. If your dog is upset when seeing people, then that's something that can be worked on. It's usually a pretty slow process, and what it kind of comes down to is you help your dog change his or her association with an individual, so that individual goes from unfamiliar to familiar, and not only just familiar, but hey, I really like you because of what you predict. And then you add the next person on, the next person on, the next person on. The one thing about dogs is that they generalize fear very well. They don't generalize anything else very well. So going with the whole person scenario, so we have familiar versus unfamiliar. If a dog, if he's familiar with the person and he's built that association, then you're usually good. It's pretty good at that point. But what time is it? Oh, it's 2:20. It's almost dinner time. So Via's next to me, letting it be known. But so that doesn't help us with the unfamiliar people. So it would be wonderful if we could just get dogs to generalize, like, hey, guess what? All people are awesome. They all will love you. They'll all give you good stuff. Like, that would be great. But dogs don't build associations. They don't generalize them very well. So it's really going to come down to helping with one person at a time. And again, that's something that we could help you with if you need help there. But it's common. So we have the critical socialization period, which is, somewhere between 8 and 16 weeks. And at that point, a lot of puppies were staying home for that. And there still are some veterinarians that are giving the advice that we need to, basically use the COVID rules. We need to sequester puppies until they're fully vaccinated, which puts them at roughly 16 weeks old, which means the window is pretty much closed for socialization. So it's really important that we get them out and let them see the world, and they build these associations. You definitely want to do it safely. So if you have a puppy now, like I just worked with a client 2 nights ago and we talked about this, like, you got to get your puppy out, do it safely. I would not be bringing my 10-week-old puppy to a dog park, but I would be carrying my 10-week-old puppy around and giving him treats when he notices people and sights and sounds and all that kind of stuff. So don't wait till it's too late. And unfortunately you may have, and there's nothing we can do to change the past, but we can do stuff to basically help with the future. And that's, kind of what this video is pointing out. So there's that. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was, oh, careful, buddy. The last thing I wanted to talk about was dogs that might be getting, anxious with you leaving. So some common advice, and I'm guilty of giving this advice before, is, just a blanket statement of do something and just do it over and over and over again until they are fine with it. And in a way that could fall under desensitization. And what that basically means is if you do it enough, it loses its meaning to your dog and your dog stops paying attention to it. So that is a proper technique in the sense that we want to get them used to the things that we're doing and get them okay with it. But if you start at the wrong spot, then what ends up happening is you could be sensitizing them and could be making it worse. So there's a lot of advice out there, but I'm going through a program right now so I can learn as much about it as possible. So that way I can give proper advice with that whole thing. But generally speaking, kind of keep an eye on your dog and see, if going to the grocery store, like if you're concerned about how they're doing, I would recommend, if you're going to go to the grocery store, you're like, I'm going to go. I am a little concerned that my dog might be anxious. Go ahead and set up a video camera, have a Zoom, put a Zoom between your computer at home and your phone, and go to the store and see what they're doing. They might just be lying on the couch and there goes your worry. They're fine. But if you're at the grocery store, for example, and you're gone for an hour, and the entire time your dog is he's running to window barking, and the most extreme side of it is he's like, digging at doors and he's peeing and pooping because he's so anxious. If that's all happening, then, there's going to be some careful planning needed to help him through that. But if he's just like barks a couple times and then goes and lies down, I would say, oh, you're fine. But a common one could be that. So there's some different resources out there. There's the separation anxiety program, CSAT, so Certified Separation Anxiety Trainers. You could Google search them. There's some resources out there. The program I'm going through is separation anxiety. SA Pro Trainer, which basically they have I think it's a free Facebook group. So if you search like SA Separation Anxiety Pro Trainer, there's a free Facebook group. I think it's free. It might not be, so don't quote me on that. But where you can get some resources there as well. And there's lots of good books out there too. But I would recommend some kind of researching some of that just to make sure if you're noticing signs that your dog is becoming anxious, you're probably going to want to do something about it. Because if you go from working from home for the 8 months and never leaving to all of a sudden leaving for 10 hours, some dogs are going to be fine with it. Some dogs will be like, good, you're gone. I needed a break from you. And other dogs are going to be very, very anxious. So there's that aspect of it too. But those are kind of three things that I'm seeing. So dogs that are too happy, which is leading to too much jumping and all that, potentially hurting somebody because they're going to knock them over. Dogs that just lacked socialization and they're kind of upset when they're meeting people, they're fearful. So we're seeing that. And then also dogs that could potentially become anxious. And again, there's no guarantee with that. Those are the ones that I could come up with that I'm seeing most common. I'm sure there's other ones too. But I think, if you're just starting this venture of like working from home, I think that's unrealistic. Most people have been doing it for a while. But in general, it's like try to stick with a normal routine to the best of your ability. And just I think that's a good way to kind of work with your dog. But that's all I got to say. So thanks for tuning in. See y'all next week and we'll have some more fun. Have a good one, y'all. Bye.